I've been playing Last Epoch patch 0.8.3 a lot since it launched. Normally I play around 30 to 40 hours and then I let you know my opinion, but now I have played significantly more, probably up to 100 hours. It's safe to say I'm really liking this patch, and today I will tell you why, as well as touch on the topics that are not all that great. And as a final disclaimer, a lot more got added this patch than I am covering in this video. I just wanted to highlight certain topics I feel are interesting, so stuff like new access being added I am not covering. So, why do I enjoy this patch so much? Some of that has to do, I think, with me taking a break. I hardly played the last patch at all, so returning now to Last Epoch makes you appreciate the game a little bit more. The patch also brought some new features and it had me returning to something I have always enjoyed doing in Last Epoch, and that is creating builds. I am definitely not in the top 5 of build creators by any means, but the creative process for me is fun, and Last Epoch is a game that allows you to create builds by just looking at skill trees and items. And that's a big upside. I've been messing around with various build ideas that I already had but never really got around to. This patch introduced so many uniques that it really reignited a spark to try and be creative with builds and concepts. I'm impressed with how well these new uniques are designed and how fun they are to use. I don't know which are community uniques and which are from the devs, I haven't been keeping track, but almost every unique that drops seems to have a clear, distinct function. Some really push you towards certain builds, while others are a lot more open to interpretation. If you look at items from a perspective of can I use this item to clear 400 corrupted timelines, then I'm sure a lot of the new uniques suck. But if you look at it like can I build something interesting with this, then I think the new uniques offer refreshing and cool playstyles, and they are build defining in many ways, which is really important of an aspect, right, of a unique item. That's kind of the point, right? For example, I've been using the Rule of the Sea Moon on a Spellblade Fire Aura stacker to shred a bunch of fire resistance. It looks cool, a stationary fire tornado, and it seems to work pretty well. Together with Herkir's Vessel, you can proc fire auras quite effectively, and the build ended up doing pretty well. It won't tackle high corruption content, but that's totally fine. I don't think it is realistic or necessary that each build can do that. As long as you can do empowered timelines, you should be okay. And if you really want to push the higher corruption, you will have to resort to more specific builds. The designs of uniques sets the bar incredibly high as well, by the way, for legendary items, and I'm curious how powerful and rare those will be. Another great aspect of the game I revisited and had another look at is the overall progression from creating a character all the way to empowered timelines. Last Epoch strikes a good balance, maybe even a perfect balance these days. I had no issues doing the campaign and then all the timelines, finding more gear, getting all my blessings, and then taking on empowered timelines to see how far I could push those. This clear path of progression was lacking before and everything felt a lot more disjointed, but now the campaign transitions almost seamlessly into the Monolith of Fate, which in turn has a clear progression as well, all the way up to the empowered timelines. All the gear upgrades along the way make the journey an interesting one, and in terms of loot and character progression, Last Epoch does a wonderful job. I am wondering if another 3 more chapters, which are planned, aren't going to mess up this balance. The campaign already feels stretched, and a lot of players are skipping the 9th chapter because it takes a long time for just one passive point. While loot and character progression are great, the campaign itself is not. This becomes more and more apparent the more characters you run through the campaign. Let's assume for a moment we are currently in a cycle, which is the Last Epoch version of a league. The first character you level and progress with in a cycle is usually completely fine. Even without a new game mechanic, which this patch just didn't have, I still enjoyed the journey from level 1 to level 100 playing a necromancer. But then you start your second character and I feel it becomes a lot more problematic because literally everything is reset. You need to run the entire campaign again, which isn't great because there's no variety at all, because nothing is randomized throughout the campaign in terms of level design or events happening. And then you enter the endgame and you need to unlock each and every timeline for each new character, and it takes ages, and suddenly the game is a whole lot less fun. Especially the endgame reset is pretty brutal in my opinion. Compare this to how the Atlas works in Path of Exile. Their progression is account-wide. Your second character can do any map they want as long as they can survive. I would love to see a similar philosophy in Last Epoch so that I can choose the endgame content I want to run after unlocking it instead of being forced down the same path over and over again for each new character. A similar kind of repetitive grind is adding corruption to your timelines. I've been seriously trying to increase corruption so I can test a build against 200 corruption and power timelines, but it takes a long time to get there. You need to complete so many echoes to just get 10 additional corruption. It's kinda wild, and not in a good way. I feel we need a solution to these grinds, which honestly just aren't that fun, and it's the main reason I took a break a few months ago. It clearly doesn't help that the endgame maps are not randomized once again, making the monolith stale and repetitive as soon as you enter a new echo. The overall systems and progression, they're very well designed and they're engaging, plotting your route, taking on modifiers and reaping the rewards. But the gameplay inside the echoes is boring and repetitive, which is a problem. I'm sure additional content inside the echoes and new types of echoes could make it feel more interesting, but on a fundamental level I also feel we need changes to make the grind less boring. The gameplay loop is simply too visible now for anyone playing the monolith, and that is an issue. You notice how repetitive it all is. Sticking a little bit with the monolith for a while, something new that was implemented is target farming. Each timeline can now spawn specific echoes which always drop a certain set or unique item type. The Fall of the Empire timeline, for example, sometimes spawns an echo which always gives you a unique or set belt. The higher your corruption, the more of these echoes you see, it seems. It's semi-deterministic, right? There's still a lot of RNG because the echoes don't spawn all that often, and once you complete them you still may not get the item that you want, but it's also an improvement compared to before. However, I feel that the impact of this target farming is rather low, actually. On paper it looks good, but in practice you get a lot more set items and uniques from just farming the monolith in general than you would get from these specific echoes, given how rare they are. And that means that most of the random unique drops, boss drops excluded, you will already have, making the target farming a little bit obsolete after a while, because the target farmable uniques don't include uniques from bosses. So after a while it is not all that valuable, and it is questionable if you are going to be using this system because it does tie you to a timeline after all, and you may not enjoy that timeline too much. It feels the drawback of this system is a bit too much compared to its rewards. I think you could improve the system in two ways. The devs could extend the loot pool, making it include also drops from bosses, maybe from only that timeline. This might be against a design philosophy, but still it would make these echoes a lot more interesting. Or the devs could let go of the idea that the farming is tied to specific timelines somehow. That would solve the issue that you are bound to a timeline that you don't like, so that you can farm timelines for other reasons, mostly for boss drops. I don't have a solution for this really, but at least now you know my issues with it. On the other hand, I don't have a strong opinion about this honestly, because it is just a minor feature. If it were to be improved, however, hopefully this is taken into account. Main issue is that the devs need to find another way to make it worth your while, because right now I feel target farming just doesn't provide enough value to make you farm a specific timeline over and over again. But that's just me. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, so put it in the comments. Let's talk a bit about the new chapter, the Sands of Majasa. Let me start by saying I absolutely hate pretty much all the enemies in this zone. These are some of the most annoying enemies I've ever faced in like 25 years of playing ARPGs, holy moly. It took around 4 hotfixes to bring their power level down to somewhat acceptable numbers, and I feel EHG kinda dropped the ball here when it comes to balancing. Anyone with level appropriate gear walking into chapter 9 would get completely destroyed, and I find it hard to believe that this was tested properly. There's no way people walked in this zone and thought, yeah, this is pretty balanced. I do appreciate most of the bosses and the mini bosses, especially that guy that pukes poison all over you and creates a poison whirlwind, similar to what Hera does. I think it's a green reskin of that, but it still looks cool and the fight is interesting too. But so many of the other enemies are simply not interesting. As a matter of fact, I think they're kind of annoying and have abilities that you don't want to deal with in an ARPG. The alpha dogs are way too fast and they hurt like hell and they stun you all the time. The big snake ladies with the shields make everyone practically immortal, but they're packed so closely together with other enemies that there's no way to reach her, so what are you gonna do? This is in my opinion just poorly designed and it doesn't add much to the game except annoyance. It's not hard, it's not difficult, it's just irritating for no apparent reason, and I hope the ability gets removed because it makes very little sense. Those elemental red and blue creatures with insane attack speeds and damage, they're not fun to play against either. It's a shame really, because it kind of takes away from the great and interesting level design and the overall zone. If you are constantly struggling with the enemies, you're enjoying the story and the environment a whole lot less. And in Endgame, you just die if you encounter these enemies, which doesn't feel great either. It's improved a lot since 0.8.3e, but it hasn't changed my opinion on these enemies. Small note about the final boss of chapter 9, without spoilers. I found the final boss challenging, but I am fine with bosses being challenging. I died a few times, but managed to kill her being slightly underleveled and not having amazing gear. I think over time this boss will be easier as people learn the mechanics. If you imagine her, however, as a final boss of a timeline, I can definitely see some issues with all the different abilities and the length of the fight. I played the music throughout the campaign and listened to the new tracks. I made a video about the music in last Epoch, you can check the card, and the new tracks haven't changed my opinion on the music too much, honestly. Most of these new tracks must have existed as well when I released that video, so my feedback wasn't incorporated in that sense. However, the composer definitely watched the video, because some of the older songs have been adjusted and the parts that I specifically complained about in that music video, parts that stood out and were extremely sharp and intrusive and distracting, those parts are now removed from the songs. Listen to this. I saw a post on the forum in which my video was referenced as well, and a lot of people seemed to agree with the sentiment I put out there. I really hope Last Epoch manages to create a recognizable soundtrack and stops creating soundtracks for zones or situations. I hope the composer starts looking at the game soundtrack from a holistic standpoint and works his way down. I proposed that in the video. I was backed up apparently by an actual producer in the forums, and I really feel that this is the way to go. Only that way the music stops feeling so disjointed and all over the place. Adding more tracks isn't the solution here. Another 22 tracks next patch will not fix the music. The problem isn't variety, the problem is that there is no overall cohesive theme, as I mentioned in the video. For more details, once again, check that video and let me know what you think. Let's talk about some of the skills. I haven't tried out the Sentinel yet, but people seem to have fun with it, so I guess it's good. I've seen a lot of powerful builds around Javelin and Void Cleave. Not sure why I'm not really seeing anyone play multi-strike, but that might have a good reason. I went with the minions instead, trying out summoners with temporary minions as well as a permanent minion summoner. I made 2 guides about it. Permanent minions aren't all that good. 2 wraiths are just very weak, and a permanent abomination has so many limitations that it is not really viable as an option. The archetype that EHG wanted to push with this patch, with permanent minions, is fine up to early empowered timelines, but it falls off after that. Much more viable are temporary minions with strong buffs using Dreadshade, Bone Curse and temporary wraiths. I'm using that now and it does maybe 4 times the damage than permanent minions. In terms of damage, it seems you can make plenty of strong minion builds. In terms of survivability, minions still feel a little bit squishy. Another round of buffs to just their health or defenses really wouldn't hurt. In my latest guide, however, I'm farming 180 corruption, by now at least, and minions aren't really dying, not even in boss fights. It's time for a small update on existing and ongoing issues and what this patch did to improve those, in my opinion, or for my PC system. Regarding sound design, meaning the sound effects and all, it's still just average, unfortunately. Combine this with average animations and we're back at the topic of impactful combat. This patch didn't do much to improve the weight or feel of combat. If you see this fire aura build walking through enemy packs, enemies are a bunch of sad pancakes falling on the floor. This doesn't look very appealing to me, so I would say this hasn't changed much since last patch. Performance, it's okay, I suppose, but it's not good. About the same as last patch for me, meaning it's around 60 FPS quite often on high settings, 1440p with a 2080 graphics card, but at least once or twice in an echo it dips in the low 30s and sometimes it completely tanks to around 10 FPS, where you get a bunch of water or ice monsters. Performance is an ongoing issue that EHG can't seem to get a grip on. It is hard to assess exactly what they're doing in each patch and what is still in the pipeline and if this is going to be fixed at some point. You can look at it in two ways. Glass half full people will say that in 2019, at early access launch, the game ran horrible and now it runs a lot better. They're right, the game does run a lot better and improvements have been made to performance across the years. But glass half empty people say that even with a 3080 GPU on 1080p, they can't get a stable 60 FPS, and those people are right as well. Just think for a minute about multiplayer and running around with a few friends who may bring a bunch of minions as well. I don't know, man. If I had to pick one issue that I'm really concerned about regarding last Epoch, it is definitely performance. Given that after 2.5 years of early access it still runs crappy and at some point there's just no excuse anymore. I guess only time will tell. I want to end on a high note because I am still playing last Epoch and I am still creating builds weeks after the patch launch. And if anyone asks me, do you recommend the game? I say yeah, I do actually. I think it's an amazing game. The game has its issues and this patch hasn't done much to improve on those, but it has its strong points as well. I pretty much stand by my initial assessment of the patch before it launched. It didn't bring anything revolutionary to the game. It wasn't the most impactful patch we've seen all year, but the large number of uniques and solid loot and character progression design plus 3 new skills enable you to have fun for a long time once more. We will get into one more patch this year, no clue yet as to what is in there. Probably not multiplayer, but who knows. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. If you thought this was an interesting video, give it a like. You can subscribe for more videos like this. See you soon. Love you all. Bye bye.